In Japan, ghosts don't simply haunt, they punish. When a soul is wronged beyond repair, it doesn't rest peacefully, it rots in rage. The Onryō, translated as vengeful spirit, is one of the most feared entities in Japanese folklore, and for good reason. Unlike gentle ancestral spirits or wandering shades, the Onryō returns to the world of the living, not to deliver a message, but to deliver justice its own twisted kind. It doesn't just terrify the guilty, it destroys them, and anyone unfortunate enough to cross its path. In ancient Japan, belief in spirits was deeply tied to the idea of emotional energy. When a person died with strong feelings, especially rage, sorrow, or betrayal, those emotions were believed to stain the world itself. If the death was unjust, that stain could transform into something deadly. The Onryō is the result of that transformation, a spirit so consumed by resentment that it becomes capable of crossing the boundary between life and death. It's not metaphorical. In Japanese stories, Onryōs cause real physical harm. They kill, they ruin crops, they bring famine, and they topple empires. Take the story of Lady Oiwa, perhaps the most famous Onryō of all time in life. She was a kind woman, married to a man named Imen, but greed and lust drove Imen to poison her so he could marry another. The poison disfigured her face before it killed her, leaving her with a twisted eye and half-melted skin. Betrayed, humiliated, and murdered, Oiwa's spirit returned her face, still horribly scarred, to take revenge. One by one, everyone involved in her death fell victim to madness or mysterious accidents. Even centuries later, actors performing Yotsuya Kaiden, a play based on her story, visit her shrine to pray for her forgiveness before taking the stage. Because legend says that those who mock or disrespect Oiwa will meet with misfortune. Even in modern times, her curse is still feared. This is what makes the Onryō so terrifying. It doesn't fade away with the passing of time. Its hatred doesn't weaken, it festers. In most cultures, ghosts haunt because they can't move on. But in Japan, an Onryō moves on only when its rage is satisfied. Until then, it can bring death, fire, or natural disaster. Some myths even credit Onryōs with causing earthquakes or plagues. To the Japanese imagination, an Onryō isn't just a ghost. It's a force of nature, an emotional earthquake that destroys whatever stands in the way of its vengeance. The roots of this belief stretch deep into Japan's spiritual history. In Shinto and Buddhist traditions, death doesn't end emotional ties. The spiritual and physical worlds overlap. A person who dies peacefully becomes part of the natural cycle, honored through rituals and offerings. But someone who dies violently or with hatred becomes trapped and able to be purified. These are called arifune-rei, or impure spirits. Over time, their anger crystallizes into something much worse. That's when they become onju. The concept is a warning built into the culture. Unresolved injustice poisons everything. The haunting beauty of the Onryō is in its contradiction. It is both pitiful and horrifying. In every story, you can see the human tragedy that gave birth to it: a betrayed lover, a wronged servant, a murdered child. The horror doesn't come from the supernatural alone, but from the emotional truth beneath it. Anyone can imagine being treated so unfairly that even death can't stop the pain. That's why these stories stay with people, their ghost tales wrapped around real human emotions. One striking example comes from the Heian period, with the story of Sugawara no Mishuzane. He was a respected scholar and statesman wrongfully exiled after being accused of treason. He died in exile, heartbroken. Soon after, lightning struck the imperial palace, fires broke out, and several of his political enemies died mysteriously. The court declared that Mishusane's vengeful spirit was responsible. To calm him, they deified him as Tenjin, the god of scholarship. Shrines were built in his honor across Japan. This shows how seriously the Japanese took the concept of vengeance from beyond the grave. They turned their ghosts into gods to stop the destruction. Visually, the Onryō has become one of Japan's most enduring symbols of horror. The long black hair, the white burial kimono, the pale skin, these aren't random details. They come directly from Japanese funerary customs. Corpses were dressed in white for burial, and women often wore their hair long and loose in death. When modern horror films like The Ring and The Grudge revived this imagery, they weren't inventing something new, they were channeling centuries of ghost lore. When Sadako crawls from the television, or Kyako drags herself down the stairs, those scenes are direct descendants of the Onryō tradition. But beyond the horror, there's a layer of respect. The Onryō isn't mindless evil, it's a reaction to human cruelty. In Japanese storytelling, even monsters have reasons. The Onryō is not punished for its vengeance. Instead, its suffering is acknowledged. That's why offerings and rituals are made to soothe angry spirits. People light incense, offer food, and pray not out of blind superstition, but out of empathy. They recognize that every ghost story begins with human wrongdoing. In rural Japan, families still perform ceremonies known as sagaki, designed to appease restless souls. The idea is to feed the hungry ghosts, to symbolically give them what they lacked in life. These traditions continue because the fear of an Onryō isn't just a fear of ghosts, it's a moral compass. It reminds people of the cost of betrayal and the weight of emotional cruelty. It's a mirror reflecting what happens when human actions create suffering that can be undone. The concept of vengeance that transcends death gives Japanese horror its distinctive power. Unlike Western stories, which often seek to banish the ghost or solve the haunting, Japanese tales accept that some evils can't be erased. You can't exercise guilt. You can only respect it, understand it, and make peace with it. That makes the Onryō not just a monster, but a reflection of society's conscience, a ghost born from the cracks in human decency. Every culture has its own way of imagining retribution. In Japan, it takes the form of a woman with long black hair, pale skin, and eyes filled with unending sorrow. She doesn't scream, she doesn't chase, she simply appears silent, inevitable, and unstoppable. Because when injustice is left to rot, it never truly dies. If you want to keep exploring the world's darkest myths and the haunting stories that shaped them, make sure to like this video, leave a comment about what legend chills you the most, and subscribe to Belmoze for more deep dives into the eerie and the unknown. The story of Oya is not just another ghost tale, it is Japan's most iconic embodiment of vengeance, tragedy, and the horror that springs from human cruelty. Her name alone can stir unease in anyone familiar with Japanese folklore. She is not a villain, not even in death, but rather the personification of betrayal. Aftermath, a woman, transformed by pain into a symbol of unstoppable retribution. Her story is at the heart of Yotsuya Kaiden, a legend so powerful that it continues to shape Japan's horror culture even centuries later. Oya's story begins in Edo period Japan, in the district of Yotsuya, Tokyo. She was married to a man named Iman, a samurai of low rank who was ambitious, greedy, and desperate for wealth and social standing. Oya loved him deeply, serving as a devoted wife despite their modest life. But Iman's ambitions soon consumed him. When he caught the attention of a wealthy merchant's granddaughter, and her family, he saw a path to the comfortable life he wanted, one that did not include his faithful wife. So he began plotting a way to get rid of Oya. In most versions of the story, Iman conspires with a man named Takuetsu, who secretly desires Oya together. They give her a poison disguised as medicine, claiming it will restore her health. But the poison disfigures her instead. Her hair falls out in clumps, one of her eyes droops grotesquely, and her skin decays. The moment she looks in the mirror, she realizes what's been done to her. Her reflection, the horror of her melted face, is the last thing that breaks her spirit. In one version, she accidentally slits her throat on a sword while trying to comb her hair, blood mixing with the strands that fall into her lap. In another, she takes her own life out of grief and humiliation. Death, however, does not silence Oya. Her pain transforms her. Her spirit rises, not as a peaceful ghost, but as an Onryō, the vengeful dead. She returns to haunt Iman in forms that tear apart his sanity. He sees her twisted face in lanterns, in reflections, even in his new bride's visage. On his wedding night with the veil lifts and it is Oya staring back at him, her eye drooping, her mouth bleeding, whispering his name. In a frenzy of terror, Iman strikes with his sword, killing the figure before him. When he looks again, it is lifeless body lying there. Madness overtakes him. He kills again and again, unable to tell illusion from reality, until his crimes and paranoia lead to his own death. It's the kind of horror that doesn't rely on monsters or demons. The terror comes from guilt made visible. Oya's face, disfigured by betrayal, becomes a mirror for Iman's corruption. He cannot escape her because she isn't just haunting his home, she is haunting his conscience. Every step he takes, Every face he sees carries the imprint of his sin. In that way, Yotsuya Kidon is both a ghost story and a moral fable. The horror is not just supernatural, it's psychological. In Japan, stories like Onryō's serve a deeper cultural purpose. They warn against violating trust, abusing love, or pursuing selfish ambition at the cost of humanity. The Onryō, especially in the form of Onryō's, the retribution that follows when moral boundaries are broken beyond repair. Her haunting isn't just punishment for Iman, it's balance restored. The universe in Japanese folklore has a quiet but relentless sense of justice. It allows evil acts to fester, but only for so long. Eventually, that imbalance gives birth to something like Onryō, spirit of wronged emotion that must be reckoned with. What sets Onryō apart from other ghost figures is how real her presence feels, even in modern times. Her story originated as a kabuki play in 1825, written by Tsuruya Nanboku IV. The play Yotsuya Kidon became a sensation because it combined domestic betrayal with supernatural terror. Audiences weren't just watching a ghost story, they were watching a social critique. It exposed the cruelty and hypocrisy hidden beneath the polite veneer of Edo society. The story was so disturbing, yet so human, that it became one of Japan's most performed plays, eventually adapted into countless films, television dramas, and even anime. But what's even more chilling is the superstition that surrounds the play itself. Yotsuya Kidon has a reputation for being cursed. Actors and theater companies who perform it still visit Onryō's grave at Myogo-yuji Temple in Sugamo, Tokyo, to pay their respects. They bring offerings, light incense, and ask her permission before performing her story. This isn't done for publicity, it's done out of genuine fear and reverence. Many believe that disrespecting Onryō or mishandling her story invites misfortune. Over the years, there have been reports of accidents, illnesses, and strange occurrences tied to productions that failed to honor her spirit properly. Whether coincidence or curse, the respect for Onryō remains deeply ingrained in Japan's artistic world. This ritual respect reveals something profound about Japanese culture. The boundary between fiction and reality isn't as solid as it seems. The dead are still part of the moral landscape. When someone like Onryō suffers unjustly, her story becomes a living warning and ethical ghost that travels through generations. Even the act of retelling her story becomes an act of remembrance and caution. The belief isn't just that her ghost could appear, but that her energy, her sorrow, still lingers. Cinematically, Iwa's image shaped the blueprint for modern Japanese horror. The pale skin, long black hair, and disfigured face became standard traits of the vengeful spirit archetype. From Sadako in The Ring to Kayako in The Grudge, every whispering, white-clad apparition in Japanese media carries echoes of Onryō. Her visual language hair covering her face, one eye peeking through, symbolizes the merging of beauty and horror, love and rage, victimhood and vengeance. It's what makes her terrifying. She's not a creature from another world, but something born directly out of human suffering. There's also a haunting irony at the core of Onryō's tale. In life, she was powerless, betrayed. In death, she becomes unstoppable. Her voice, silenced by cruelty, becomes eternal. The imagery of her ghost is tragic, but also strangely empowering. It reflects the ancient idea that truth, once violated, cannot stay buried. Onryō's face, distorted and horrifying, becomes a symbol of truth revealed, the mask that shows what lies beneath human deceit. For those who study folklore, Onryō's story represents more than fear, it represents justice through terror. The ghost is the manifestation of everything ignored and suppressed, the pain, the guilt, the cry for fairness that no one listened to. When that pain becomes too great, it doesn't disappear, it transforms. That transformation is what keeps legends alive. Even today, visiting Onryō's grave feels like standing at the crossroads between myth and reality. Offerings of makeup, mirrors, hairpins, and comb, symbols of her last tragic moments, are often found there. People come not just to ask for protection, but to apologize. Her story reminds everyone that the smallest act of cruelty can echo for centuries. The Onryō is not a fantascience, the emotional truth that refuses to die. And so, in every retelling, Onryō's face reappears, half beautiful, half ruined, yet fully alive in the cultural memory of Japan. She is vengeance given form. She is fear made moral. And above all, she is a reminder that justice, when denied in life, will always find another way to surface, even if it comes from beyond the grave. Okiku's story is one of those rare ghost tales that feels simple on the surface, yet the more you learn about it, the deeper it cuts. It is not a story of kingdoms or warriors, but of a single woman, an ordinary servant, whose pain became eternal. Her haunting does not involve blazing fires or collapsing buildings. Instead, it centers around a sound of quiet, rhythmic counting that builds into a scream so terrible it freezes the blood. It is the sound of injustice that refuses to fade, echoing through Japan's most famous haunted site, Himeji Castle. Okiku lived during the 17th century, serving in the household of a powerful samurai named Aoyama Tesan. She was said to be kind, loyal, and beautiful, a woman who took her duties seriously and lived a modest life. Her main task was to care for 10 exquisite porcelain plates family heirlooms of immense value, not just in money, but in honor. Losing even one would be considered an unforgivable failure. In that world, a servant's mistake could mean death. But Okiku's tragedy wasn't born from carelessness, came from cruelty. Aoyama, her master, desired Okiku. When she rejected his advances, his admiration turned into fury. He couldn't bear the humiliation of being refused by someone of lower status, so he devised a way to destroy her. He hid one of the 10 plates and accused her of losing it. No matter how she searched or pleaded, the missing plate couldn't be found. Aoyama gave her a brutal choice: become his lover and be forgiven, or face punishment for her supposed failure. Okiku refused. Her loyalty to her principles outweighed her fear. In response, Aoyama beat her, tortured her, and finally killed her, throwing her body down the castle well to silence her forever. But Okiku did not stay silent. Soon after her death, the people living near Himeji Castle began to hear strange sounds at night. When the moon rose, a faint voice would drift from the well. It started softly, almost like a whisper. 1, 2, 3. The counting continued steadily. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and... Then it stopped. A moment of quiet followed, broken by a piercing, heart-shattering scream that seemed to split the night in two. The voice belonged to Okiku, still searching for the missing 10th plate, trapped in an endless loop of anguish. That image of a woman's ghost counting night after night became one of Japan's most enduring supernatural symbols. The story spread far beyond Himeji, becoming part of national folklore. Even people who had never been near the castle would whisper about Okiku's well, imagining the cold echo of her voice rising from the depths. Visitors still say they feel a chill when standing near it, a sense that someone unseen is standing just beside them, watching. The power of Okiku's story lies in its repetition. The counting is simple, almost childlike, yet it captures something deeply human: the need for completion, for justice, for resolution. Okiku cannot reach 10 because her life ended before she could finish what she began. That missing number tends the gap between life and death, between peace and torment. It is the wound that never closes. Every 9 she whispers is a reminder that something was taken from her a plate. A life, a future, and she will never stop searching for it. For centuries, storytellers and artists have retold Okiku's legend, each version reflecting the moral anxieties of its time. Some portray her as a victim of patriarchy, representing the countless women who suffered under feudal systems that gave them no voice. Others see her as a spiritual warning, a soul that lingers because her honor, and by extension the household's, was violated. The samurai world was built on rigid codes of duty and purity, and Okiku's haunting became a metaphor for how easily those ideals could be corrupted by lust and power. In theater, particularly kabuki, Bancho Sarayashikitha Dish Mansion at Bancho became the most famous dramatization of Okiku's story. It evolved through many versions, but the essence remained: a servant girl wronged, a cruel master, and the endless counting from beyond the grave. In these performances, the actress playing Okiku often crouched beside a well, her white kimono stained, her hair long and disheveled, her voice trembling as she counted. The silence before she screamed, the missing number, was the climax, a moment when the entire audience held its breath. Unlike Western ghost stories, which often end when the spirit is exorcised or laid to rest, Okiku's tale has no such closure. The well still exists at Himeji Castle, and people continue to visit it with offerings of incense or flowers. The belief is that Okiku's soul remains restless, bound to the place of her death. The well, surrounded by a simple fence, looks calm in daylight, but those who've stood before it at night speak of unease, as if the darkness itself hums with memory. Modern psychologists and folklorists interpret Okiku's story as a symbol of repetitive trauma. Her ghost is caught in a loop because her mind, or rather her spirit, cannot move on from the injustice done to her. The counting ritual reflects the obsessive search for resolution, a kind of haunting that mirrors real psychological pain. The scream at the end is not just fearsome, it's the sound of despair that has nowhere else to go. Even outside Japan, Okiku's influence is unmistakable. The image of the pale, long-haired woman emerging from water, popularized in modern horror films like Ringu the Ring, comes directly from her legend. The association between female sorrow, water, and vengeance began with her story helped define the visual and emotional tone of Japanese horror. Quiet, methodical, and deeply morbid. The fear, doesn't come from gore or sudden shocks, but from the slow realization that some pain never ends. One fascinating detail about Okiku's well is how it serves as both a physical location and a cultural metaphor. Wells in Japanese folklore are often seen as gateways between the living and the spirit world. By being thrown into one, Okiku was symbolically buried between both worlds, denied rest in either. Every night she rises from that depth, counting, not just for the missing plate, but for justice denied. The water becomes memory, reflecting the endless replay of her death. In some regional versions, Buddhist monks eventually try to free her spirit. They wait by the well at night, reciting prayers as she counts. When she reaches 9, one of them calls out 10 before she can scream. Hearing the missing number at last, Okiku is said to weep softly and disappear, her soul finally at peace. But even with that gentler ending, the legend continues to describe her as a presence felt rather than seen, proof that some stories linger because they were meant to. Okiku's haunting reminds people of the thin line between innocence and doom. She was not a warrior or a queen, just a woman who stood her ground against cruelty and paid the price. In that sense, her ghost doesn't just inspire fear, it demands empathy. The counting, the scream, the eternal presences are all echoes of injustice. When people tell her story, they aren't just recalling a horror tale. They are remembering the cost of cruelty in a world that too often punished the powerless. And so, when the night falls over Himeji Castle and the wind stirs around the ancient stones, locals still whisper, "Listen closely." Sometimes they say, if you're quiet enough, you can hear a faint voice from the well counting, always counting 1, 2, 3, all the way to 9. And then, as the silence deepens, a scream rises through the dark that seems to come from every direction at once. It is Okiku's voice, still searching for what was taken, still reminding the living that even in death, the truth never stops calling. If you close your eyes and picture a ghost from Japanese horror, you already know what an Onryō looks like. Pale skin, eyes dark with sorrow and rage, hair spilling down like wet ink, and a loose white robe that seems to float rather than hang. It's one of the most recognizable images in all of horror, yet this look isn't just for effect. Every element of it carries meaning, rooted in centuries of ritual, culture, and symbolism. The white robe and the black hair are not costumes. They are visual proof of the boundary between life and death. In traditional Japanese funerary customs, the dead are dressed in white burial kimono called kokatabera. White in Japanese culture symbolizes purity, but in the context of death, it also marks separation from the living world. It is the color of the shroud, the soul stripped of its earthly attachments. When you see an Onryō wearing white, you are looking at someone who has completed their journey through life but refuses to let go. They are dressed for the next world, but remain here, unable to cross over. The hair, long and black and often disheveled, is equally powerful. In ancient Japan, women typically wore their hair tied up neatly while alive. Letting it down was reserved for sleep, illness, or death. When the hair of an Onryō hangs loose, it's not a stylistic choice. It's a visual sign of death and emotional unraveling. It's as if the soul's turmoil spills outward, taking form through the unkempt strands that move and twist like living things. The moment you see that, you know you're not dealing with a living woman. You're seeing a spirit whose rage has broken every boundary, including that between body and soul. The combination of the white robe and black hair also plays on contrast: light and darkness, purity and corruption, peace and vengeance. The ghost's body might be pale and still, but her hair, her eyes, her movement there, dark, alive, and charged with fury. It's as the perfect visual metaphor for what the Onryō represents: purity destroyed and transformed into wrath. In classical art and early theater, this appearance was carefully codified. During the Edo period, kabuki plays that featured vengeful spirits used specific techniques to create the illusion of floating white figures. The actor would wear flowing white garments that shimmered under stage lights, their long black wigs swaying as they moved. The makeup shirin painted the face stark white, while blue veins and darkened eyes gave the impression of a corpse animated by anger. Stage assistants would sometimes lift parts of the robe with invisible wires to make it look as though the ghost drifted instead of walked. Every gesture was designed to communicate not just fear, but sorrow. This distinct look became so iconic that it transcended the stage. When Japanese cinema began exploring horror in the early 20th century, filmmakers borrowed directly from these kabuki traditions. The white robe and long hair followed the Onryō from painted woodblock prints to celluloid film. By the time Kwaidan, 1964, introduced ghostly women with silent floating movements, the visual language was already deeply embedded in Japanese consciousness. People didn't need an explanation. They knew exactly what they were looking at. The dead had returned. The modern horror classics that Western audiences know, The Ring Ringu and The Grudge Ju-on, owe everything to this imagery. Sadako and Kyoko, with their pale faces hidden behind curtains of black hair, are not inventions of cinema. They are modern echoes of ancient archetypes. Their movement, slow and jerky, mirrors the unnerving rhythm of kabuki spirits. Their silence amplifies the scream that's coming. The moment they appear on screen, even without words, the audience understands. This is an Onryō. What makes this design so powerful is that it speaks to something deeper than appearance as a visual form of storytelling. Every time the Onryō's hair covers her face, it symbolizes the way trauma obscures identity. She is no longer the person she once was. The hair hides her humanity, turning her into an embodiment of unresolved pain. When she reveals her face, it's not a reveal for horror alone, it's the exposure of her suffering, the raw wound beneath the mask of vengeance. In Japanese ghost stories, the Onryō's rage is not random. It's directed toward those who wronged her, but it radiates outward to touch everything around them. The white robe, fluttering as she moves, reminds us she was once human. But her actions, the curses, the hauntings, the destruction belong to something beyond human comprehension. Her appearance captures this duality. She is both victim and destroyer, sacred and profane. There's also a cultural layer that makes this look even more unsettling. In Western traditions, ghosts are often portrayed as transparent or ethereal, suggesting a gradual fading away. The Onryō, by contrast, appears solid almost to real. Her white robe doesn't make her look faded, but hypervisible, almost glowing against the dark. It's as though she's forcing the living to acknowledge her, demanding to be seen. The color contrast between white and black becomes a psychological weapon it traps your eyes and refuses to let you look away. One of the most fascinating interpretations of the Onryō's appearance comes from Shinto and Buddhist symbolism. In these spiritual traditions, hair holds energy it's tied to a person's ki, or life force. Cutting one's hair can symbolize repentance or renewal, but letting it loose represents surrender, loss of control, or exposure to the supernatural. The Onryō's hair, untouched and flowing, is a statement. Her energy has broken free from all restraint. Her rage is boundless, her will uncut. The white kimono, meanwhile, connects her to both funerary and bridal attire. This dual meaning carries a haunting irony. In feudal Japan, women were often buried in white robes similar to those they might have worn on their wedding day. The symbolism blurs love and death, devotion and doom. Many Onryō stories, including those of Oiwa and Okiku, center around betrayal by lovers or mastersmen who destroyed them out of greed or jealousy. Their ghostly appearance in what resembles a wedding gown turns their vengeance into a dark reflection of love, twisted into suffering. The long black hair has another layer to it, visually tied to water. In Japanese horror, water is often the element that connects the world of the living and the dead. Ghosts like Sadako and Okiku rise from wells, bathtubs, and lakes, their hair slick and dripping, moving like tendrils of the deep. The hair is not just a symbol of death, but of the medium through which spirits pass. When the Onryō's hair falls over her face, it's as if she's emerging from the water of the underworld, bringing the chill of death with her. It's also worth noting that this aesthetic has influenced horror far beyond Japan. Western filmmakers, from the Ring remake to the Grudge adaptations, borrowed the visual without always understanding the depth behind it. They saw the fear, but not the sorrow. In Japan, the image of the Onryō is tragic before it is terrifying. Her white robe isn't just ghostly, it's ceremonial. Her black hair isn't just creepy, it's sacred. She is horror made holy, vengeance made visible. What keeps this visual alive through centuries is its ability to communicate emotion without words. Even someone unfamiliar with Japanese culture can sense the loneliness, the injustice, the overwhelming sadness that pulses beneath the image. When the Onryō steps forward in her white robe, her hair swaying in unnatural silence, the viewer doesn't just see a ghost, they see grief that has hardened into wrath, and that's the essence of her power. The Onryō doesn't chase or scream to scare you. She simply appears. The white robe glows faintly in the dark, the hair ripples though there's no wind. And you know without needing to be told that something sacred has been broken, and it's coming to collect its due. The fear isn't of death, it's of recognition. You are witnessing what happens when sorrow refuses to die. If there's one lesson buried in every Onryō story, it's this: nothing done in secret stays buried forever. In Japan's long tradition of ghost tales, the Onryō is more than a terrifying figure meant to make people shiver at night. She is justice personified, a symbol of moral balance that no court or emperor can override. Her return from the grave, isn't just about revenge, it's about restoring harmony in a world that failed her. When human beings break the natural and moral order through cruelty, betrayal, or greed, the Onryō steps in to correct it, and her method is always terrifyingly final. This idea comes from a deep-rooted Japanese belief in Raikon, the spirit that lives on after death. When someone dies peacefully, their spirit joins the ancestors, becoming part of a calm, protective lineage. But when a person dies in agony, betrayal, or rage, that spirit becomes polluted. It cannot find peace, and that corruption spreads into the world of the living. In ancient Japan, this was known as Onryō, the path of vengeful spirits. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a moral system. If you wronged someone deeply enough to stain their soul, you weren't just hurting them, you were breaking the balance between the living and the dead. That's why Onryō tales always focus on human cruelty. They are mirrors of a society that valued loyalty, duty, and harmony above all else. A samurai who betrays his lord, a husband who poisons his wife, a master who kills his servant, all of them invite the same punishment. The Onryō becomes the invisible court that human justice cannot match. And what's fascinating is how these stories don't separate personal wrongdoing from cosmic consequence. When an Onryō seeks vengeance, her wrath doesn't stop with the guilty, it ripples outward. Innocents may suffer. Villages may burn. Crops may die. Because once balance is broken, everyone feels the tremor. In that way, these legends serve a social purpose. They remind people that personal actions have spiritual weight. They make moral responsibility unavoidable. In a time when many wrongs went unpunished, when women like Onryō and Okiku had no voice, no power, and no protection, these ghost stories became justice in another form. The powerless could imagine their suffering being avenged, not by human hands, but by forces beyond control. The Onryō became a voice for those silenced in life, a haunting reminder that cruelty has a price even death cannot erase. One striking example is the way Japanese theater and literature used Onryō stories as warnings for the powerful. In Yotsuya Kaiden, the ghost of Onryō doesn't just haunt her murderous husband, she destroys everything he built through lies and ambition. In Bancho Arashiki Okiku's endless counting from the well is more than grief, it's the sound of guilt echoing through eternity. Every time these stories were told on stage, the audience wasn't just scared. They were reminded of their own moral obligations. The message was clear. If you betray trust, if you corrupt love or loyalty, the universe will remember. Even the rituals surrounding Onryō legends reinforce this lesson. Performers who portray Onryō in plays or films often visit her shrine in Tokyo before production. They bring offerings, bow, and ask for forgiveness, just in case. Because everyone in Japan knows that her story, though ancient, still carries power. The idea isn't superstition, it's respect. The Onryō is not just a monster. She is a force of consequence. To take her story lightly is to tempt that force yourself. You can see this warning reflected in the broader idea of Tatari, curse that arises from injustice. In Japanese folklore, Tatari isn't random bad luck, it's the universe pushing back. A violated oath, an ignored debt, a cruel betrayal. These acts create spiritual pollution, and that pollution needs to be cleansed. If it isn't, it festers. The Onryō becomes the embodiment of Tatari, the spiritual rot given shape. She's not evil for the sake of evil. She's the result of what happens when balance is ignored. This moral undercurrent still shapes Japanese storytelling today. In modern films like The Ring or The Grudge, the Onryō's curse always begins with an act of injustice, someone murdered, silenced, or forgotten. The horror isn't just that the ghost kills, it's that her rage has logic. She kills because someone deserves it, or because the world allowed it. The fear isn't of death itself, but of what death remembers. Western horror often focuses on the randomness of evil. Japanese horror, rooted in the Onryō tradition, insists that evil is never random. It's the echo of a moral debt unpaid. And what's most striking is how this belief made people more careful with each other. In older times, a village might hold purification rituals after a violent death, not only to honor the deceased, but to prevent their spirit from becoming vengeful. People feared more than ghosts, they feared injustice itself. To wrong someone wasn't only a social sin, it was a spiritual hazard. The Onryō wasn't just watching from the shadows, she was waiting for imbalance to give her form. Imagine living with that understanding. Every act of cruelty could echo beyond the grave. It changes how people behave. It forces empathy, restraint, humility. The fear of the Onryō becomes a way to maintain harmony. My parents told their children these stories, not to scare them for fun, but to teach them that every lie, every betrayal, every act of selfishness carries a shadow. The ghost is that shadow, the part of conscience that refuses to die quietly. Even now, the Onryō is woven into Japan's cultural DNA. Her image appears in anime, in modern ghost tours, in art installations, and internet lore. But underneath the screams and the flickering lights, the same old warning beats like a pulse. Betrayal cannot be buried. The white robe, the black hair, the slow, deliberate movements, all of it still speaks to a truth that transcends time. Justice may sleep, but it never dies. If you step back and look at it, the Onryō legend has always been Japan's way of reminding humanity of its limits. We like to think we control fate, that we can hurt and move on, cheat and forget. The Onryō exists to prove otherwise. Her haunting is not punishment, it's correction. It's the universe demanding equilibrium, the spirit world finishing what human law could not. The horror of her presence is the horror of realization that no sin disappears simply because we stop looking at it. And that's why these tales endure. They aren't just scary stories whispered on stormy nights. They are the conscience of a culture wearing a ghost's face. They force people to see what happens when compassion fails, when justice collapses, when love turns to greed. The Onryō dosen't forgive, she remembers, so others will not repeat the same cruelty. So the next time you see her image, the pale woman in white, her black hair swaying like smoke, remember that she's not just there to haunt your dreams, she's there to warn you. Do not break what cannot be mended, do not wound what cannot heal. Because in the silence after betrayal, something ancient still listens, and it will rise. If you've followed this story till now, you already know how deep these legends go, how every ghostly whisper carries centuries of meaning. If you want to keep exploring the unseen, the stories where horror and history meet, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Belmoze. There's more waiting in the dark, and I'll be here to guide you through it.